So recently I have this atheist drop this mega bomb on me. Exodus 21:7. When a man sells his daughter as a slave, she shall not go out as the male slaves do. Well, of course that's it, that proves it that Christians are bigots and we believe in slavery and selling our daughters and atheists are morally superior people and they don't believe these things. Well, you've come to the right place, and I'm about to open your eyes. The first thing we need to establish is you do not understand these ancient texts, not even at an elementary level. Your understanding is zero. Whenever you're reading the Bible, especially the Old Testament, you always must remember you must read it through the eyes of the people it was originally written to, and in context with the culture where they were. What was that culture structured like? Most evangelical and Protestant Christians are taught under pastors who have seminary educations and understand these nuances of scriptures and are taught this when we are reading them. If you're an atheist and you don't have any the benefit of this type of leadership, a book I could recommend to you would be Misreading Scripture with Western Eyes by E. Randolph Richards and Brandon J. O'Brien. So let me just deal with this one passage here for a moment, and this will open your eyes to a lot of the Old Testament. Ancient Israel was a primitive tribal culture that was structured for survival very differently than our culture. They didn't have labor unions or time clocks or anything like that. Their economy was structured around tribal leaders, wealthy, successful trades, business people who were, in essence, little kings. These communities generally specialized in producing some type of goods that were traded with other communities. Essentially, everyone who wasn't a master in one of those communities was a slave. Everyone. Either that or you go out alone and try to make it on your own, which would have been a very hard life in that world. This kind of indentured servitude seems very foreign to us. We abhor it. But there is a contemporary example of this that still exists today. If you ever served in the military, that's exactly what you were, an indentured servant. A slave literally owned by the government. And as tough as military life is, we don't typically think they are abused people. It's even a badge of honor to be such a servant today. We see exactly this in the Bible as well. Abraham's servant Eliezer is a good example. He is given great respect when going to another land to seek a wife for Isaac. Why? He was a representative of Abraham, a known little king in that world. Notice that Abraham sent Eliezer on a long journey with an entourage of other slaves carrying valuable goods on his mission. Eliezer never tries to escape with the valuables, even though he could have. Why? He was a faithful servant, and he had a very good master, and being part of that community gave him a high standard of living and respect in the world. There was no way he was going to betray his master. That was their culture. Now back to Exodus 21:7, the verse that proves that Christians hate women and were bigots and believe in slavery. But now let's read it in context with ancient Hebrew culture. When a man sells his daughter as a slave, she shall not go out as the male slaves do. If she does not please her master, who has designated her for himself, then he shall let her be redeemed. He shall have no right to sell her to foreign people, since he has broken faith with her. If he designates her to his son, he shall deal with her as with a daughter. If he takes another wife to himself, he shall not diminish her food, her clothing, or other marital rights. And if he does not do these three things for her, she shall go out for nothing, without payment of money. So our immediate response when reading that passage from our cultural point of view, and not their cultural point of view, is, wow, not only did that man sell his own daughter as a slave, She cannot ever go free like the men slaves do. But that's not what's going on there at all. When a young woman leaves her home to be married or join another community in Israel, there was a dowry to be paid for her. Now her parents and family will no longer have the benefit from her support around the house, and they are to be justly compensated for that loss. She will now be working for another family and community. But why would this father sell her as a slave to this man? Well, the passage reveals that. She is most likely going to be married to the son of that wealthy master, and thus she will be the joint heir to his fortune someday. What a horrible father, wanting his daughter to be married to the son of a wealthy tribal leader. This father was looking out for his daughter in that culture and wanted her to have the best possible chance at a prosperous life. And notice in the passage, the master is forbidden to sell her to another nation if she and his son don't work out. Selling a woman to any of the pagan nations around Israel would mean she would be a sex slave. And all sexual relationships outside of marriage is forbidden in Israel upon pain of stoning to death. So if things go wrong, she could be redeemed, returned to her family. And she couldn't just be thrown out on the street as the men are when their 6-year contract is up. She is automatically given the security of being a bond servant since she's a woman. So she's actually being afforded extra protection. She's not going to ever be thrown out of this community, and that is an agreement this master has with her father. Throwing a woman out on the street would likely mean she would be forced to support herself through prostitution and so forth. So this practice of just throwing the woman out of the community is forbidden. And of course, that brings up another so-called atheist gotcha. Why are people stoned to death in ancient Israel just because they wanted a little love? Well, let's imagine for a moment you atheists are correct. There is no God. What possible motive could the Israelites have had to justify the practice of stoning the sexually immoral? Well, back then, all the disgusting pagan cultures around them had sex with everyone and everything. Syphilis and other STDs were rampant in those cultures. And even their newborn children would catch it from their mother. They didn't live long back then, and they couldn't just run to the doctor and get antibiotics. They suffered as syphilis slowly consumed their bodies, and they died early deaths. Even today, hundreds of thousands of people die from syphilis and other STDs. This is not a benign threat. So, if you had a sexually immoral couple in your syphilis-free Israelite culture, you could prevent many thousands of deaths by stoning those potentially disease-spreading lawbreakers. This was just common sense back then for people facing an incurable threat that they knew consumed the cultures around them. The sexually immoral were not just misbehaving, they were putting the entire tribe at serious risk of disease and death. Now, in Christianity, in New Testament Christianity, we do not follow those rigid rules and laws given to national Israel, and the Apostle Paul explains this very well. I'm not going to go into that. We even have the example of Jesus saving the adulterous woman from stoning, saying, "Go and sin no more." So as Christians, we are still obligated to follow the rules of sexual morality, and we do reject it as destructive behavior because, in fact, it is destructive behavior. So I don't want to hear a lecture from atheists and secularists saying that, Christians don't respect women. That is just pure, obvious nonsense. If anything, what I see is just the opposite. I see the atheist and the secularist dishonoring women in our culture. Christian men honor their wives. We don't knock up our girlfriends and leave them to raise children by themselves. We don't treat women in our culture like prostitutes who don't get paid. Instead, we give them worthless IOUs filled with empty promises of love and respect in the future. We actually love our wives and children, and we want our daughters to grow up to be successful people and have the best possible lives that they could have. We hold women as equals. We're not oppressors of women. We don't beat our wives and treat them like slaves or something like the pagans did. In fact, it's probably the way Christian men treated women way back in the first century that was a large driving force for the spread of Christianity. You know, what would you want as a woman? To be treated as a slave by the pagan culture around you, or be honored as an equal by your potentially Christian husband? Not to mention belong to a community of people that regarded you as a valuable human being. But all that aside, my main point on this video was that slavery and other oddities in the Old Testament, as you were reading it, you were seeing it through foggy glasses, through modern culture. We tend to, the minute we hear the word slavery, we immediately assume, well, gee, that's like what happened in the American South, where they were, you know, they were whipping and beating people and kidnapping them from the other side of the world, um, and that just isn't the case. You know, as I pointed out, you know, being a slave or a servant in that culture could actually mean high honor in some cases, depending on you know, who your master was and your position within that community. In the case of a man selling his daughter as a slave, in context with that culture and, you know, economic structure, we see that the man was actually trying to improve his daughter's standard of living. To be in a prosperous community meant you had a good food and clothing. Having a chance to marry the son of a leader of such a community was putting your daughter on the top of the world, really, which is completely the opposite impression you get when you first read that passage. And that is due to you really not understanding what's going on in that passage at all and projecting your modern assumptions into the text. And, you know, that's not good exegete for reading these texts. And so, you know, I hope this little talk has maybe hopefully opened your eyes. At least hopefully you won't think Christians think that slavery is okay and that we hate women and all these other kind of myths I see out there in the kind of YouTube atheist world. It's just not true. It's just flat out not true. Okay, so I'm going to wrap this up, and thank you very much for watching.